Right on the dot. All right, I'm going to call to order this September 14th meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission at 5:01 p.m. And we have 6 commissioners. John Driscoll is absent this evening. The first order of business is to approve the agenda from the August 24th meeting. So do we have any corrections, additions that we'd like to put before approval?
No, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Agenda or the minutes?
I'm sorry, agenda. Did I say minutes?
I think you said agenda.
Okay, good. Agenda. We're on the agenda. If I said
But we're
minutes, I
talking
meant
about today's agenda.
Today's, you know what? I did say minutes.
Okay,
No. So we're talking about the approval of the agenda for today. I skipped that. I'm
Great.
sorry. So we want to approve the agenda for today. Is that good? Or did we have something to
I
add?
move to approve the agenda as presented.
second.
Okay, good. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Unanimous. Now, the minutes from the August 24th meeting. Do we have any need for corrections, additions and so forth? And if not, would someone like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes from the August 24th, 2023 meeting as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, carries unanimously. We will move on to citizen comments on any matters that are not on this evening's agenda. Anybody want to speak on something other? I see no one rushing to the podium. We will close that comment period and we will move on to new business. Our first order of new business is an entry quarter certificate of appropriateness 2023-04. An application by Kimberly Hostetter for a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Harmony Home Team by eXp Realty Office at 637A Waddell Street, tax map number 35-1-1, owned by HNC Rental Inc. And we'll start with our staff report. Arnie?
Typically, I would jump straight in and explain to you what the sign types are being requested. But if I could ask you to go over to page 3 or 5 of the packet and then give you a little bit of background, since we have some new folks, about entrance corridors. Entrance corridors are similar yet different from a historic district. So a downtown proper, so our CBD, Central Business District, is Zone C1, is also a historic district. And there are a number of design guidelines that come with making any alterations for signage and otherwise in the historic district. Similarly, out of our 2 C2 zoning districts, which are suburban style zoning districts, and if you think about East Nelson Street from Kroger all the way out to Sheets, and also on the other side of the street, that's all C2 zone. And also if we head out South Main Street, basically from the fire station out to the Econo Lodge, and including the property that we're going to talk about this evening, that's in our C2 zoning district. So there are standards that we have in our C2 zoning district, but is also in our entrance corridor. So anything in that's zoned C2 is automatically in an entrance corridor. And also similar to the county, they have a tourist corridor overlay. So in these entrances or tourist areas, you would like to have more than just your base sort of type of development. So aesthetically, it should be a little bit better than what we would allow pretty much in other districts. So to just quickly go through on the bottom of page 3, a certificate of appropriateness shall be approved by the Planning Commission prior to a building permit being issued for anything on the exterior of a building, prior to site plan approval, and prior to any exterior color changes to a building or to a sign. So you will frequently see entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application for signage, sometimes for buildings. If somebody is planning to change the color of the front of the building or add an awning or that type of improvement. We typically don't see too many that have a landscaping or architecture other than colors or site planning, because most of the site plan is already there, the development. unless we get a redevelopment, maybe a PDMU one day, we can all hope. So the second section that's quoted there, 420-6.7B, you can consider any architectural feature which influences the appearance, such as, but not limited to, motif and style, color, texture, and materials, configuration, orientation, mass, shape, height, and location of buildings, location and configuration, parking areas, landscaping, and buffering. So it's fairly wide ranging. And the next one states that all applications for a certificate of appropriateness must satisfy the following design standards for landscaping, signage, architecture, site planning, and lighting. Now, today we're actually only talking about signage, but we're going to just cover, and we, in this particular packet, we provided all of them to you. Typically, we would not show you landscaping and architecture and site planning. We would just provide you with the sign standards. And these are fairly open-ended. They're not very specific. And let's just take the first one for landscaping. If we go over to page 4 of 5 or 9 of your packet, landscaping shall be used to soften the visual impact of development, enhance the appearance of the area. Now, when you have one of those, that's going to be your interpretation. Does that take 2 magnolia trees or 1 magnolia trees and 3 bushes, or how does that get handled? So these are just to explain or to show that there will be some latitude in how you interpret these things. Any questions on entrance corridors generally before we get into the signage specifically?
I have a question. How much? So it says that the planning commission can consider these. Does that mean that we can require them?
No, I think
Can
when
we
the
require 2
proposal,
magnolia trees versus 1 magnolia tree and 3 bushes?
you would look at the requirements for landscaping or for screening as an example and see what we have and what they're proposing. Does it meet those standards? And in that particular case for a certificate of appropriateness, based on your interpretation of what you just read, would that require one more? You could make a motion to approve and require one more in that instance.
All right, thank you.
It also has to be obviously reasonable for what the proposal is. If they're adding 2 parking spaces, you can't require 10 trees. That's not a great example, but it's got to be sort of proportional with the impact that you expect from that development or what's being proposed. So that's entrance corridors quickly. If there are no further questions specifically to signage, the first one, and I'm on page 9 still, each parcel shall have an overall sign plan which reflects a consistent style and specifies the size and color scheme for proposed signage. Well, this property has a number of users and buildings, and they do not have a uniform sign plan. And we can also not dictate one or require them to the owner to provide one to us. So we have to deal with it as best we can. So with the type of signs that are being requested, do you believe that's appropriate for that parcel? Number 2, materials used in signs and their support structures should reflect the building served by the sign. However you interpret that. Number 3, and the last one, sign colors should be harmonious with the building which they serve. So those are your standards. And now I'm going to ask you to go back to page 1 of your staff report. We are being requested to review 2 wall signs, 1 window sign, and an A-frame sign, again for the property at 637A Waddell Street. Parcel is in the C2 zoning district and is therefore automatically in the entrance corridor. It is a commercial building that exists there with, I believe, 3 different offices, and the real estate office would be in the left-hand most portion of that building if you look at it from the parking lot. So that's the photograph on page 7, the top one there. Driving up in the parking lot, Kenny's is right across the parking lot, and there is a user or another entity or use in the middle of that building, and the real estate office is in that left-hand portion. So you see the door there pretty much in the middle of the photograph, and the 2 windows to the left of that. That would be their storefront or their office area. Also provided you with a photograph from Main Street, South Main Street, pretty much just off of South Main in the little parking area there where the co-op has their gas pumps and kerosene pumps, whatnot, just to give you an idea of what the view would be from South Main for this wall sign that is proposed for the back of the building. I'm not going to bore you with the sign regulations that are provided there. Suffice it to say that the proposed signage does meet the requirements for size and type and all that. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have it in front of you. Then the entrance corridor regulations, which we already covered, along with the signage specifically. And staff does find that the proposed meets the sign criteria for the C2 zoning district in the entrance corridor. Now, if we ask you to flip over to sort of explain some of the signage items that are in the application on page 13 of your packet. Signs, window signs can be the lesser of 20% of the window area or 6 square feet. They have enough window area to be allowed a 6 square foot sign. So they're proposing one 6 square foot sign, as you see mocked up there in the photograph. They've also provided you with a number of different versions. So on page 14, you see another version of that. And it's going to be a vinyl sign that will be applied to the window. And along those lines, they also provided, and we ask this a lot, probably more often in our certificate of appropriateness in the historic district for the actual vinyl. So I'm going to pass this around. Don't get bothered by the blue color. That's just the backing. It'll be a clear vinyl, or the backing will be clear. So it's only the vinyl and then a clear window. And in this instances where this would be on a signboard, it would be a white backing. And then on page 15, there's also the addition of the phone number there in vinyl. If we have a provision that allows signs that are less than 1 square foot in size to be a minor sign and therefore not needing a sign permit, but they did include it here just to show you what that would look like. Going over to page 16, there's an example of what the wall sign would look like. It's going to be on some sort of solid backing that could be a metal or wood. It's going to be painted white in an oval shape. And then you see the graphics on there, which are vinyl applied, which is the sample that you've just been passed around. Page 17, I think it's just another example of where it could go, either between the door and a window or between the 2 windows. Same type of sign, same size. It'll only be one of those. It won't be 2 because they're only allowed 1. And then over on the page 18, they have the option of a 32 square foot sign on the rear part of the building. And that if the property owner doesn't allow them to paint it on the building, which is unlikely, then they could do another oval sign that gets applied to the rear portion of the building that could have some visibility from South Main Street. On page 19, we do have an example of what the A-frame sign or sandwich board style sign would be. That meets our requirements as far as being 6 square feet on each side and no more than 4 feet in height. And that sign's typically taken in and out. When you're open for business, it goes out. Otherwise, it comes in. And then page 20 is just, again, the example of the graphics, as is 21. And that's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
I'll ask a question. So we allow 1 wall sign per business per street frontage. So the one on the back, we're showing a little bit of latitude that the street frontage is Main Street. Okay.
Correct.
I think
And-
it looks good. I think everybody needs to be clear that's usually street frontage is closer, but
And we
It makes
allowed that
sense.
to the previous tenant as well. When the flooring gentleman was up there, we provided that at the same time. And he's actually the person that cleared off the entire back of that building because it was completely overgrown and you couldn't even see it from South Main. And that leads me to one other thing, if I could. Since this isn't on South Main, I would suggest that you could grant a little bit of latitude. These are not ugly signs, but let's say they were not what you would expect maybe on South Main proper, but this being completely off of South Main and maybe not on the major roadway, just up in the cul-de-sac of a parking lot, that in this instance, you could provide a little bit more leeway or maybe be less strict in your interpretation.
Other questions for Arnie?
I'm curious about what made you say that. Like if it was,
Nothing to do with the type or style of the sign. It was just something that I thought of when I was thinking about a presentation and I didn't remember to say it.
Okay.
It's just, we are not on South Main. So if one of the other structures on South Main came in and wanted to put up a sign, you really want that to be harmonious and fit well with the building. But here we're up behind and not on the main street, not on the main thoroughfare. So I would suggest that you have a little bit of latitude.
And is one of the things that we can ask them to explore changing the color from stark white? I can't quite tell. This building looks like it's a shade of white. Is that it's tan? And I understand wanting to have the background of the sign pop, but I'm just wondering whether one of the things that we could talk about is whether they could tone the white down, particularly on the Main Street sign, if the side that's sort of on Main Street. Is that something that we could ask them to consider or look into?
Yes, and it depends on how you want to do that. In other words, do you just want to ask them to consider it, or would you like that as part of your discussion, first of all, but also as part of the motion to say that the rear wall sign, meaning the one facing South Main Street, shall be an off-white color, the background to be an off-white color to match the wall, or, however you actually come up with the language. So are we just at a discussion point, I presume, and not ready for a motion, but you could include such a thing in a motion.
Okay.
Process wise, and I'm sorry if you did mention this, just so everybody knows, this does not go to council for it's like entrance corridor.
Right, that's a planning commission approval.
So the buck stops here. Is that what you're telling me? Okay. Thank you. So, is this when we have conversation
No, I
amongst
think-
ourselves?
No, we would go to see if the applicant would like to make a statement first. So are you Ms. Hostetter? Yeah, thank you very much. And state your name and address for the record,
My business address.
your business address.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. Kimberly Hostetter, and it is 637A Waddell Street in Lexington. And thank you for having me tonight. I'm totally new at this, but happy to answer whatever questions that I can, and also happy to explore the color thing. I'm not married to that. We were just trying to figure out what would be like a neutral thing where the signs would still show, so that's the main thing. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. I guess this would be the point, unless you have a specific question for Ms. Hostetter, then I think we would proceed to discussion among ourselves. Oh, then we'd have public comment, but do you have a question for?
Well, so you've already said that you're open to considering other, variations on stark white.
Mhm.
So I guess amongst commissioners, what are your all's thoughts? I guess let me just say that I think that I would prefer if it was not quite so stark, particularly given that on page 18.
So Shannon, maybe we'll save that for our discussion. That's right.
Okay,
So in other words, that goes for our discussion. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it then for now.
And
guess.
I
You can say whatever you
I was
want.
to say, make a
Yeah.
suggestion of how we could maybe come up with that. So the front of the building is vinyl, the back of the building is painted cinder block. So certainly we could color match something that is maybe just like a shade or two lighter than what's there, and have the backing that then it would almost look like I just had a standalone graphic kind of. I don't know that we could match the colors exactly, but we could probably get it close. But then it would almost appear like it was just a vinyl coating on there if we did that.
so
Kimberly, what is the sign on the back? Actually, what's it made out of?
Nothing yet. We would be making it.
Okay, but so you're not just painting your name on the side of the building. There's actually going to be.
Correct, because that would be, he said owner approval, and I think that it probably makes more sense for us to just put it on a backing rather than if I left that building, have to repaint the whole back of her structure.
Right.
So we would just be putting it on a backing with the vinyl based on the size measurements. But I think that we could move, since we would be fabricating the backing, I think that we could color match something that was similar to the paint colors on there. But like I said, then it would look more like, just like my logo was on the wall itself.
Yeah.
So as long as that meets the guidelines, that would be fine. From my standpoint, I didn't love the stark white either. That's all I've got.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that more. We'll see now if there's any public comment. Open it up for public comment on this. Seeing none, then we can commence to,
Okay.
does that seem to be the one issue that we want to talk about, the color? Is that, there's anything else? So what are your thoughts, Shannon?
So I think Kimberly has addressed my concern by, I mean, if that would be, if you'd be willing to sort of match that paint color on the back of the building, I think that would absolutely, because the image at the top of this page it looks very nice.
Right. So it would
It's the
basically be
the
that.
white that's sort of like jarring.
Yeah.
Visually.
And I did have another question. Arnie, I don't think that we talked about the roadway sign. That's on my copy. Is that not on yours?
I don't think
Okay.
that's part of the submittal.
Okay. All right. It may have.
That-
gotten-
That come later.
I don't think so. It may have just been an error. We won't worry about that now. I'll deal with that separately.
We do not have that in.
Okay, all right,
Our.
great.
The one thing,
I think
So-
that was her intention for the roadway sign, but maybe she didn't put it on.
okay,
I
so
say
that's our
she, my
mistake,
admin.
because we thought this was just to show when you had a listing, what the listing signs were gonna be, but you actually meant that this was gonna be down at the entrance off of Waddell Street, when you turned up the driveway.
Or something similar to,
Okay.
yeah.
So that was staff's mistake. We just assumed that this was a sign would be the one that would be going around and being placed in yards when there's a listing. But that's not true. So they're also asking for a freestanding sign to be placed at the best way, maybe on the application, or and you all have driven up there, so maybe this doesn't need to be explained. But as you turn off of Waddell, there's a driveway, so it would be on the left-hand side because the right-hand side is all asphalt. So there's only one, the only caveat to this is there's only one freestanding sign that's allowed per parcel. So if Kimberly takes it with a realty sign, then Kenny's and anybody else that's up there cannot. But that's an internal issue with the property owner and their tenants. If they wanted to come in and do a multi-tenant sign, they also had that ability. But sorry for our mistake in assuming that this was a listing sign and not the sign.
I
that
can
you-
understand. Yeah. Why? And just for sake of clarification too, I don't think we have any intention for it to be this tall. I think it would just be like lower, kind of more like a directional
Mhm.
sign that's going up there. So I don't know if that height would matter.
And,
Yeah.
and have you talked to the folks at Kenny's and
I mean, I'm kind of I have not. The answer is no. I'm of the assumption that they probably don't, it doesn't matter to them.
since they haven't done
Since
it
they have been
themselves?
there for so long and don't have it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the only person that would possibly want one as well would be the tanning business, and Arnie and I, which I'm definitely happy to talk to her about it. We have a very good relationship. I don't think she's really attached to one either, but, Arnie mentioned that the owner could have one put in that would be multi-use, but it could become a sticky issue of where a multi-use sign would actually fit in that entrance, correct? So
So Arnie, for that type of sign, what would be the area limit or height limit on it?
25 square feet for a freestanding sign, which that is well under that, and 15 feet in height, and that is well under the 15 feet.
and then I think my last question before I sit down is on the sidewalk sign. Then because that is one that I would be taking out each day, does the coloring of that one matter? Or, would that one be fine to be white and a little since it's not staying out and on the building?
We have a picture of that one?
it's on page
More-
9.
A
Yeah.
sandwich sign, sorry.
There it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And along those lines, I'm hoping that I'm correct in that the only sign that has to not have a white background is the sign that's on the rear of the building that's facing on to, that can be seen from South Main Street. So everything else that's been proposed, it's not the window sign, but the wall sign and this A-frame sign can have a white background, correct?
Which I would be fine with the wall sign on the front being consistent with what's proposed on the back.
And I'm not opposed to having it white. I mean, I think you should look and see what to make sure that your logo doesn't get faded out if it's off white. I'm sort of worried about the yellow not showing up if
Yep.
it's not white.
Well, and that was gonna be my next
Yeah.
question is like, is there some discretion on my end? You know what I mean? Cause like, it's important to me that it looks good. Like, am I able to get it approved 2 ways? Like, yes, on the front, you can do white or you can do the tan. And then like you use your discretion to make it look aesthetically pleasing to the building and so that you have visibility on your logo. But only with that exception on the front, not necessarily the back.
So I will say on this back image, I hadn't even seen that the rest of the logo, the home. I
Harmony
can't
Home
read it
Team.
on there.
Mhm.
It doesn't show up. So
Mhm.
just saying that,
Yeah.
that is definitely, that seems like it's going to be problematic.
It could be. Yeah. And they did a white, I don't know if it's on the sample, but the vinyl company did suggest like even on the window that we do a white outline on it, which could maybe help solve part of that problem, especially if it's important to have it more cohesive with the back of the building as far as the backing sign. So, I mean, I think we could work around it, but it is kind of hard until I physically get something in hand to know how it's going to look. So.
Yeah, I definitely think a circle around it would help, but I think that these two colors are going to be challenging to get a good background on. Sorry.
You certainly have the ability, if in your motion, if you wanted to require that the sign on the rear of the building facing South Main have a background that matches this building, but provide latitude for the wall sign and or the A-frame sign to either be a white background or something that has a closer match to the building color.
In this building, that is the back of the building we're talking about. So it is that I've seen, it's a tan.
Yeah.
I don't really have.
So I think, are we okay with how Arnie just framed that? What that? Yes,
As far as
about how specifying for the sign on the back versus having more latitude for the front. In other words, he get
To allow the applicant on the front wall sign and A-frame sign, the ability to either have a white background if that works better, or an off-white background if that works better.
That's fine with me, but I still think that I think that we have, I brought up a problem. I mean, sorry, I created a problem here and I didn't intend to. But I do think that, I don't know, maybe you need to have something white behind the yellow parts. And I don't know how to address that exactly visually.
It doesn't have to be white, you
Gonna
know.
say,
No, it
yeah,
doesn't.
if I
Right.
do, a
Right.
warmer white color with that, do you think that would maybe also kind of be a middle ground?
I do. I just think that it would be better not to have it be a stark white on the back, just in terms of, visually you want it to not look sort of, I think you want it to look sort of, nice,
Yes,
sort of
I
like,
do.
right. And so I guess I would just, I would think about how you're going to get that visually. Yellow is a hard color to see from a
It is,
distance.
yeah.
Yeah.
well, are we in the discussion part?
yeah, we're in discussion.
Okay,
part,
okay, then
yeah.
I will discuss. I mean, I don't, if it's on a separate sign that you're placing on the back of the building, I don't have a problem with it being bright white. I'm not quite sure what the issue is. I can see if it's painted directly on, you don't want a background.
Yeah.
But if it's a whole separate sign posted on the building, which it sounds like that's the direction you're heading in, why can it not be white?
Actually, I think it just doesn't, in this picture, I know it's tacked on, it's photoshopped on there, but I think it just doesn't look quite as,
I think it'll look better because it's not really that color, it's tan, so you will get some pretty good I think you'll actually get some nice contrast with even a bright white.
Right. Sorry.
Can I
There we
throw
go.
something else in the mix?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. What if somebody decides to paint the building? That has to be up for approval also, right? Okay,
A different color. If you're doing
Correct.
maintenance and you're painting the same color, not an issue, but if you change the colors, yes.
okay.
I think I'm going to withdraw my concern. I don't want to hem you in. I would personally just recommend, having a slightly less than stark white, but I'm going to take it back.
Can I ask another question that I might complicate my own situation? But what are the rules on having a frame around it? What is that allowed
Frame
Like,
around,
around the round sign so that it sort of creates a little bit more of a separation versus, you know what I mean? Like that might be part of why it looks so awkward because you just sort of have this white oval sitting on the back of the building. But
Right.
if it was framed in something that either matched the front shutters or the door
So,
or the roof
a
or.
frame in a different color than the white background.
Yeah.
To somehow tie in.
I don't want to take myself backwards and
Right.
have to like reapply. So if that's
The
that,
board-
then.
It could be a painted border on the
Right, like a
sign.
border. Yeah, something to give a little bit more definition. Like,
Would
is
be
that?
fine.
You can certainly ask for that. There may be a request from planning commission not seeing that or understanding completely what that may mean. They may ask you to come back. But you could, as an example, on page 20,
Mhm.
this is just sort of a drawing, but if you can imagine that oval outline
Yeah.
around it ends up being the same blue color as the harmony, you could potentially approve something like that to give it a little bit more of a border that pops on when it's
If we
attached to a
think that would be
building.
more attractive for the goal to be.
So I would say that would be fine. I think it would look nice with that. I would still have the same concern about the yellow on the white.
Yeah.
Yellow on white is just hard to read. So, but that's up to you.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing that with that all of the suggestions and discussion of the aesthetics of it and what's going to be visually appealing and not garish and so forth. I think everything we've heard would fall within what we're willing to accept. Right. So I think if we somehow something goes up that it is wildly different from what we discussed here, I think that would be the problem we might have. But nothing, any of the variations we've talked about, I think we're saying would be fine. Right, including painting the border around it or making it a sort of frame to help it stand out.
Can we specify that it may be done with a border in a blue that matches the rest in the, whatever blue specified to match the rest of the sign?
Yeah.
Is it?
The
Yeah.
more detailed your motion is, the better and easier it will be for enforcement if there's a need for enforcement,
Yeah.
which I hope
So-
not. But
All right, so there's a several hues of blue that are in here. So if it's like if you frame it that way, that it's framed or outlined in a blue that is in the same palette, right? Then we're still in the same color ballpark, and that'll work. That's right.
And yeah, how big is the sign on the back of the building?
I have down
I
here.
mean, dimensions, not
Let's see.
Is it?
Oh,
Is it,
square feet.
32.
right, but
it
it's
32?
32 square feet.
it can
But
be up to 32 square feet. Is that right, Arnie? So
But how-
roughly, I don't know, 8x4 or 5x6 or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, I don't think we had down
Yeah.
but
so
It's
5 by
1
6.
square foot per lineal foot,
Yeah.
but they have so much more lineal footage. So a minimum of 32 is allowed. So the smallest sign was chosen in this case, as far as size goes. So 32 square foot. sign.
So about 5
and a
by
half
6.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does that sound
5 and a
about
half by
like
6,
what you're
yeah.
talking about?
Mhm.
5 by 6 would be 30 feet.
right. Yeah,
so-
I do know with the way that the logo's set up, it's definitely gonna be longer than it
Yeah.
is gonna.
Right. So
On the
5
height,
by
yes,
4
yeah.
or something.
5 by
It could,
6.
yeah, it could
whatever.
be on the more on the 4. Yeah.
Okay. Um, okay.
Are we discussing this one all tonight?
Yeah. So now that's the question. We allowed, we don't have to ask them to come back. It was,
Certainly include that in your motion.
Right.
It was a staff's
Right.
issue with leaving it out
Right.
inadvertently, thinking that it was something else. But if
Right.
you wanted to approve the signs along
Right.
with the freestanding sign, you
Right.
certainly can,
Right.
as proposed or as presented.
Okay.
It just looks like a for sale sign.
Yeah. Do you
And the-
want to comment on?
Yeah, if we're discussing this one
Yeah.
also, it's a beautiful sign, but it definitely looks like a for sale sign. I see no arrow going up, like enter here for whatever, but this just looks like some properties for sale.
Correct. Yes. And it would have an arrow on it. I think that is a great question. It would just have an arrow. And I honestly think it would be lower profile than that.
So it sounds like maybe we would need to see that.
That's fine. Yeah, that's no problem.
Then how would that work? If we have to, do we have to do another whole thing?
We typically, with our ARB, Architectural Review Board, they will ask that, approve what's in front of you and ask that the one thing that you have a question or would like to see more detail on, come back at the next available meeting. And then sometimes they also allow the applicant not to have to apply a new application fee or submit a new application fee.
Right, which would be appropriate in this instance. Yeah. So I mean, I can see why you want to have a sign like that because you're a realtor and you want to have a little sign and say, oh, here's our realtor company. I think that's the idea. So I guess, does everyone feel like we'd like to see this sign?
I would like to see the
Before-
sign. Yeah.
Okay, so so I think the other signs, I think we're in agreement pretty much, right? And we'll want to then specify in a motion, however we're going to frame this motion, that you'll come back with the design. It seems like the size of it all is well within the regulation, so that's not a problem. And as long as the owner isn't going to then jump in and say, no, wait a minute, I was going to put up a multi one, or Kenny's was going to put one. I mean, that's not our concern, right? That's between the owner and the tenants, right? Okay. So we're at the point where someone would like to try to craft a motion. With,
I will attempt.
okay, are we good? Well, you go ahead if you want. Yeah, that'd be
That
great.
good?
Yeah. Mhm.
All right, I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application EC COA 2023-04 for 2 wall signs, a window sign and an A-frame sign to be located at 637 Waddell Street as proposed by the applicant with the stipulation option to, or no, with the with the option to change the color, the background color of the sign on the rear of the building. And also to change the color within a limited palette of whites on the back of the building, and also to include a blue circle border around the sign on the back of the building. Do we care about whether it's on the front of the other signs as well,
No.
or on any of the signs? In the same, it's just the one blue, is it? Yeah. In the same blue color. How's that?
Well, do we need the front sign in the
Oh, right.
motion?
You could either
Yeah.
approve the motion or discuss and finalize the motion that you have now and then address that separately if you like.
Okay.
That could just be a statement that it doesn't have to necessarily, or direction, and doesn't necessarily have to be a motion.
Okay, the one thing about that motion, did it include the street sign?
No, it did not.
Can we, is it called a street? What's that? Is it called a street sign, an entry?
Freestanding sign that we want to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
That's
that
not
doesn't
part-
need to be in here. Okay. Okay, so we got that motion more or less.
Yeah.
Okay,
Second.
okay. Any further discussion on that? Okay, so all in favor of this motion, say aye.
I
All opposed? That carries unanimously. Now, do we need a motion for the other thing or just say
You can give direction.
would you please, when you work up the design that you would like to have on your street sign, please bring it back to us at the earliest convenience of all parties.
And And do we have to have a motion to waive further fees or?
Just add that into the.
And we
draft.
will not be asking you to submit another application or additional fees.
Great. And then do I need to plan to be here for that meeting in 2 weeks?
If you get something to us in the next week, we can get it into the packet for Friday's meeting, for the Friday packet for the following week's meeting. And we always recommend that somebody attend if you're able.
Beautiful. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
for,
you.
for working through this with us. We appreciate it. Okay.
Here, and you want us to have that. Okay.
All right, as we regroup here, we will move on to, and you are welcome to stay and enjoy the rest of the meeting. Okay, good. Excellent.
You don't know what you're in.
The next order of new business, seeming increasingly not new, is the zoning ordinance amendment 2023-01, our annual zoning ordinance amendments, accessory dwelling units. So we'll have staff report blended with continued commission discussion, and we will make sure we try to remember public comment as well. So Arnie.
We are trying to finalize this rough draft so that we can have something available for the public sooner than later for advertised public hearings in front of you as a board. And what we've done at the last meeting was get through about half of this review. So the big orange arrow on page 25 is where I'd like to start, because I don't really want to start with parking because parking's never fun. So I'm going to start at page 25 at E, and then we'll go through what we have left, and then we'll jump back to parking.
Yes.
In item E, E1 in particular, even though you did specify at the last meeting that no more than 60, we're talking about accessory dwelling units detached. We've already sort of talked about the general standards for both attached and detached. We talked quickly because there aren't as many standards for the attached accessory dwelling units, and now we're in the accessory dwelling unit detached standards. And the first one, we'll talk about the gross floor area, which again, we did get through last time, 60%, no more than 1,000 square feet. But then there was also some direction for staff to come up with some language, and I didn't do a great job, and I'm admitting to that. But this last sentence that you see underlined, I'm going to call it the Mirabai exemption, in the sense that if the house is small, if the main dwelling unit is small, we wanted to provide at least 600 square feet for somebody sort of as a floor square footage, so they could at least do that, but also not limit somebody to a minimum of 600 square feet if somebody decided to do something less than 600. So that's where the language came from, or what's being proposed to you. Again, I think that could certainly be cleaned up a little bit, but I just wanted to pick up at that point, unless anybody has any comments about that, suggestions for improvements.
I thought it read pretty well. I thought it read
clear
very
enough?
well. Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't quite as bad. Okay, well, if that's all right, then we'll pick up with the next item, E2, detached accessory dwelling buildings containing accessory dwellings shall not exceed neither 25 feet nor 1.5 stories in height. Maybe I shouldn't read all of them and just hit the highlights. So it sounds like we're okay with number 2. And then here's going to be where we need to pick up with our setbacks issues. So we had a discussion last time where we're talking about perhaps additional or more than the minimum number of setbacks for accessory buildings. And the thing that did provide you that might be helpful is the lot requirements table. We are currently talking about allowing accessory dwelling units in the R1, R2, RM, and RLC zoning districts. And then I've highlighted also the rear yard setbacks, because most of these are going to be in rear yards. So the side yards and the rear yards would be probably the most applicable as far as what you want to consider. And specifically in item 3 that we're talking about now, we're not really talking about RM or RLC, but we're talking about R1 in the first item. So any detached accessory building approved after whatever the adoption date of this ordinance is containing an accessory dwelling shall comply with setbacks as follows. The first one there, for lots in the R1 zoning district, the nearest wall of the accessory building shall not be located closer than 15 feet to a side lot line or 15 feet to a rear lot line. And you'll notice in your side lot line in R1 is 10 feet. So our first attempt at this was, well, maybe we should require a little bit more for this type of structure. And we bumped it up from 10 feet on the side to 15. And then we had a little second guess and we thought, well, or 10 feet. So that's for your discussion. These accessory detached dwelling units, should they in the R1 zoning district be the same side yard setback as the main building or any building or structure at 10 feet to the side, or shall it be a little bit more and be 15 feet? And similarly to the rear lot line, where an accessory building would normally have a little bit of an allowance and could be as close as 5 feet, would you want the rear setback for a new accessory structure, accessory dwelling unit in particular, be 15 feet from the rear lot line?
Let's start the discussion.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm okay with making it whatever is existing, so the 10 and the 15 for the side. And I like what's proposed for the rear, but
Same.
In R1, it says 10 feet and 5 feet here is what it says. Wait, where are
And
what are
you-
looking
yeah, and
at?
so that is what, that's a good point you bring up. So we're looking at the
Mhm.
rules. So currently for R1, for an accessory building, so not a dwelling structure, it can be 5 feet from the property line.
Gotcha, gotcha.
We're just saying, and if you're living in it, then you
Mhm.
have to, it has to be a little further back.
Okay, okay. Mhm.
Any other thoughts?
Well, what on 3, 1, what do we just, we have to decide whether we want 15 or 10? Is that it?
Correct. There are two items there for your consideration. One is for this detached accessory dwelling unit, do you want it to have the same 10-foot side yard setback or 15 feet? So a little bit more than was normally required. And in the rear, as opposed to the 5 feet that would normally be required or allowed for an accessory structure, would you like to have a 15-foot rear yard setback?
How about 10 and 10?
I would be okay with 10 for each for side or rear lot line setbacks for a detached accessory dwelling unit.
I like that idea too.
Since it's 25 for home, the main building, we're gonna let the other building, I'd go with 15 at least. Since we demand 25 for the main building, I hate to go down to 10.
So we could do 10 feet from the side yard and 15
15
from the rear. I'm not sure what the value of doing that is, though, just in terms of, if you think about. So you're thinking about, a rear lot line where you're sharing another, where you're butting up against somebody else's rear yard.
Yeah, it's just the density and the closeness and the more space.
In the current for a garage is the same as accessory building? Is it 5 feet from the rear?
If it's a detached garage, yes, it's an accessory structure and therefore 5 feet.
There's a
From the
big
rear.
difference though in a garage and a home.
Yeah, I agree.
So far I'm hearing 10 and 15 or 10 and 10.
Yeah, I think we're all on the side. I think we're all okay with 10.
Yeah.
And then
Why would it not be 15 if on for R1, we're saying it has to be 15 feet from the rear lot line? Why wouldn't we make it 15? Why would we be more permissive on a garage for the rear lot line?
What, I'm sorry, your question is why would we be
Yeah.
more permissive for a garage?
Right, if a new garage is being built and we know it's gonna be an ADU, why would we be more permissive for that?
No, if it's a new garage, if it's a new garage, then it's a new garage. And you can't then say, oh, now it's an ADU. Because that would be right, if it's currently a garage and it's 5 feet, that's one thing, but if you're putting up a new structure that you're saying this is an ADU.
Right,
And a garage.
and that's
It's
what,
got to meet the bigger the two setbacks, the more restrictive. So it would have to be 15 feet.
and that's what we're talking about, this section is talking about brand new construction.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Right?
so you're asking what?
I'm saying it should be at least 15 feet. Why would the garage, why would we be any more permissive with a garage than we are with the ADU? In 3, we're being more permissive if we don't make it 15 feet from the rear setback than we are in.
So,
I think, yeah, if we make it 15 feet, it's more restricted. For an ADU.
No, if you read right above on little I. So for R1, we're saying the setbacks are 10 on the sides or 15 feet to the rear lot line.
No.
Am I reading that wrong?
On the
Yeah.
current. Are you
Yeah.
talking about
E3.
oh, no, you're talking about this. You're talking about the
Yeah,
proposed.
right. I'm
So
talking about the
right,
rule, the ordinance we're coming up with.
yeah,
So we're saying R1, your setbacks are 10 feet on the side and 15 feet from the rear lot line, right? I'm reading
No.
that right? And then on R2, it's 15 from the sides and 20 from the rear lot line. So if a new garage is being built and we know it's going to be an ADU,
none,
Yeah, maybe that's the confusion here
You're-
that we haven't picked up on is the garage part because that should be ADU. We shouldn't be specifying a garage specifically without the ADU in
Right.
this section.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
that's probably, it's a good catch in the sense that
where does it
that
say?
should say,
3I.
It's E3.
Where's it say garage?
It says
the
Garage.
third one.
third subset under there. When we
No,
talk
when a
about R1,
garage
then R2, and then the third one there says when a garage situated within a required rear yard is entered from the alley, the garage shall not be nearer than 10 feet to the property line adjacent to the alley or side street.
Yeah, what's
So
that doing in there?
The garage, I think we're just cutting and pasting from other places. And when they said garage, I presume they meant garage with an ADU over it. So in that case, do we want to allow latitude? And I think it's not so much maybe the garage, it's just the fact that we're entering from the alley. So in a rear loaded lot where you have an alley, can the garage / ADU be closer to the rear lot line because it's actually an alley as opposed to somebody else's property? So we need to clarify garage, what that means in this case. But I
Yep.
think the main part of it is you're
Entering
rear
from the alley.
loaded from an alleyway and the ADU can detach, can be closer to that rear property line than the 15 feet. That's in R1 and the 20 feet that's in R2.
That seems okay to me. If it's on an alley.
Well, but for 3.1 and 3.2 says nothing about, it says nothing about an alley. So why does it matter if there's a garage and an alley as opposed to?
I think that's what the point is in R1 and R2, you have a rear property line that's shared with another R1 or R2
Yeah.
property. So you may want a little bit more distance to the rear property line. But if there's an alley, it's just an alley and you should be able to perhaps be able to put your garage / ADU, which really should be garage is stricken and your accessory dwelling unit can be placed closer to your rear property line when your rear property line is adjacent to an alleyway.
And
So
But my point is that you're only talking about you're only talking about an alleyway and a garage. You're only talking
So-
about the
so-
alleyway in 3, right?
Mhm.
Why not in 1?
So maybe we need to strike 3 and then add or 10 feet for a rear lot line that has an alley behind it.
Well, for a new garage, if we're just building a garage, The side setbacks are 10 and 15.
Yeah.
The rear is 5. It's just the rear we're really
That gets
saying
you the,
what that's really the question, is what the rear should be.
Mm.
And if it's adjacent to an alley or side street, we're saying
You
10,
need to specify.
10 instead of 5.
This is not just a garage though, so
Mm,
it needs
right,
to
that's-
say,
Yeah.
it's gonna have to say something else besides.
Yeah, it'd be a garage ADU.
Well, it doesn't say that.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
Well, I think actually
Right now, a garage.
it does actually, when you read E, the beginning of E, detached accessory dwelling unit shall be subject to the following standards. But I would call it a garage ADU just in case. Because
Yeah.
that's all we're talking about. We don't care about a regular garage. That has a whole different set of standards. We don't need
Right.
to change the side setbacks. It's just the rear setback on an alley or side street.
right, but what if it's an ADU?
Yeah.
Against an alley that's not a garage
This is-
slash
we
ADU.
need
This
to
is what-
clarify that
This
too.
is what's
Yeah.
throwing me off here. So there's like that 3.3 introduces 2 new variables. Is it a garage or not? And is it adjacent to an alley or not?
Yeah.
And I don't understand if there's a particular combination of those 2 variables that this is meant to apply to, or either or. Right, so if something were an ADU that had nothing to do with the garage, but would its proximity to an alley, would we want to have this there for any reason? Or is that a consideration that only applies when there's a vehicle that's going to be? Am I making sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever actually realized that a distinction was needed.
Yeah,
So I believe since we're always talking about ADUs and rear loaded out properties typically have a garage, but if they don't, that's fine. So I think it's the ADU. So the
Got it.
ADU can be closer to the rear property line or the side property line when you have a side street along the side or an alley in the back. So do we clearly need to make a distinction? Are we talking about a garage and or accessory dwelling unit? Or just say a detached accessory dwelling unit or ADU here?
yeah.
Because the garage is pretty much irrelevant because
Okay.
if it's
Yeah.
only a garage, then you get the 5 feet anyway.
Yeah.
So can we strike 3 then? The
Well,
triple I
or
and,
just
and just add that into each one of the ones above?
Or just take garage out of it, basically, is the other way, right?
Mhm.
But then you have to have you have to have separate numbers for R1 and R2. Unless you're making them both.
I think that's the idea
feet.
thus far is you get a break and it's the same 10 feet to the property line adjacent to the alley for both R1 and R2 is the way it's written now.
So for
So
3,
we
you
would
would
need
take
to
out,
say that.
where 3, you could take out garage when an ADU is situated within a required rear yard is entered from an alley. The ADU shall not be, just substitute ADU
Mhm.
for garage.
Correct.
Right? Now, so you're getting that. If we're saying it's going to be 15 feet from the back, then you're getting a break if you're up against an alley because there's extra space there, right? So okay, so I think but that brings us back to the question, for one, do we want it to be 10 feet or 15 feet from the back? Right, that's kind of what we're asking, right? In other words, normally for your main structure, your main building, your main house is 25 feet, right? So how much of a buffer are we thinking is enough for that smaller accessory dwelling unit? Is it 10 or 15 feet? And is that going to be a deal breaker for any of us? Is that going to be a deal breaker on many properties? Right, that's the kind of the question here.
And I guess we're just talking about alleys. Side street doesn't really present anything different, does it?
No.
Well, if it's a side street, couldn't somebody enter off of the side street? I think it would still be the same to my mind. If let's say you've got a corner lot, you've got a side street and an alley. And you want to put this, maybe the house is on this street over here. And you want to put the ADU on the corner, 10 feet from the alley, 10 feet from the side street. Wouldn't that be okay? Would that be okay?
The street and the alley really doesn't need protection from the ADU
Right,
as a neighboring property would.
exactly.
But normal cases setbacks apply to
Mhm.
a side street in an alley.
How much of a setback is there? Well, right.
It would be a side in that case.
So sorry, over here, the front yard setback for R1 is 15 feet. So maybe it does make sense to leave aside. The side street is 15 feet. Like if it's a side street on one side of the property. Maybe it would make sense.
But
to
then you
leave it
don't
fif-
even need to mention side street, just strike it because it would fit with the regular.
Right.
But an alley, do we want to give leeway?
And it
Is
just,
really the only
So-
question.
and it just occurred to me, why does it matter if the ADU is entered from the alley?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Right,
I
'cause
think
that-
it
does that
needs to
matter?
just say
Yeah.
when the rear lot line is, is along an alley,
The setback.
then
is
the
10
setback is
10
10 feet.
That's good.
Which we don't have to put
Yeah.
if we're saying it's only 10 feet anyway, right? We only need to have that if we're saying in 3.1 that it's 15 feet.
Correct. Well, we should,
Or for R2, then that's,
R2
that's
is-
right,
yeah.
okay, so.
Mm.
I see, right.
Shannon, would you mind repeating what you said a moment ago?
yeah, when the rear lot line runs along an alley, then the ADU shall not be nearer than 10 feet from from the rear property line. Or I don't know whether it needs to be shall not or can be 10 feet. I don't know, because it's allowing more.
Or maybe just say the rear setback is.
The
10
rear,
feet.
yeah, the rear sure, yeah, that works. So when the rear lot line runs along an alley, the minimum setback is 10 feet from the rear line. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So are we good then with in 3.1, the 15 feet to a rear lot line, does anyone have problem leaving that as it is written there? It's 10 feet on the side, 15 feet to the rear lot line in R1. Anybody have any?
I agree.
Yeah, okay, so then let's do that. Then 3.1, do the 10 feet to the side, 15 feet to the rear lot line.
Mhm.
And then I guess similarly then in 2, would we then be good with 15 and 20, 15 to the side and 20 in the back?
Mhm.
I don't know why there's a difference, but I'm sure there's a good reason. Why is there a difference?
Because R2 is more suburban,
Okay.
and so it's designed to have
Providence,
bigger
for
locks.
example.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Bigger lot, so
Okay.
that's the idea,
Okay.
yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of distinction between the two, and when you see it on our map, you'll scratch your head a little bit, but we do have bigger lot size, bigger lot frontage requirements, and also increased setbacks
Thank you. Mhm.
in R2.
And I think the idea is these lots, if you want to build one of these, you would have the room presumably even with these setbacks. I think that's the idea.
Okay.
So,
I have one more tiny thing that just needs to be clarified.
sure.
We were talking about garages with ADUs. I thought you weren't allowed to have an ADU above a garage.
Not currently, because you're not allowed to have an ADU in our current ordinance that unless it's within the main structure,
Mhm.
but this will allow it.
And yet, didn't we say that it's not, okay, well, I don't have a tape measure, but 25 feet or a story and a half. So is the ADU
Oh,
above a
height-wise,
garage?
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Height-wise? The,
Can you fit ADU in a half a story above the 1-story garage?
And that's because you have a pitched roof on it.
Oh,
So
okay.
your ADU will be,
okay. All right,
It's possible.
that's a
Okay.
good question. though.
Yeah.
okay, that occurred to me.
25 feet is a fair amount of height. But we also actually have to look at the definition of half story, but
Yeah.
that's a little bit problematic.
Yeah.
Because 2 stories is 20 feet.
Roughly. Mhm. But so far it is for height, 1.5 stories or a maximum of 25 feet is the way it's currently, the new ordinance is written.
Did you, I was looking at did you provide a picture of?
Maybe not in this
In this
version.
One of the old ones, if I can find it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to the next.
If I can recall, 10 and 15 for R1.
Yes,
15 and 20 for R2.
Mhm.
yes.
Is everybody okay with the 20?
Mhm.
And then 10 feet when the property is abutting in the rear yard and alleyway.
Correct.
Yes.
That's the side and the back.
Yeah.
Are we, is it side and rear or
Well-
just rear?
Oh,
Oh, the side is 10
anyway,
anyway
and
in
Okay,
R1,
yeah.
and then in R2,
it's 15.
it's 15, so we can leave it at that. Right?
So we could do 10. Oh, wait, sorry, this was. Sorry, that's for a side yard though, right? Side. This is, aren't we just talking about the rear yard?
Yeah, so you're right,
So it's just 10 feet.
just 10 feet, yeah,
For the rear.
for the rear.
For the rear.
Yeah, if it's against the
Side.
alley, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Next,
Sorry. The next one, no problem there. Entrance of, oh, that was fairly straightforward where the entrance can be and not on the front. And the next one is about historic district, no problem. I did realize number 6 and number 8
Yeah.
are a little bit similar, and maybe we don't need both of them.
I think they're word for word.
So maybe we strike 8,
strike it.
unless there are any questions. Going over to 9, where we are talking about nonconformities, which is not an easy subject. But so far we have, and one thing I forgot to mention, John couldn't be here. He provided some comments and those are on the last couple of pages of your packet. And he did have a few for nonconforming structures. So in non-conforming, detached non-conforming accessory buildings. So what do you do with the buildings that are already in existence? We've talked so far about like ADUs in the main building, ADUs that are detached in a separate building that is a new building. And then what do we do with existing buildings that are in the rear yard, presumably, or side yard that may have been for another use, because so far accessory dwelling units that are detached are not an approved use or by right use. So what do you do with buildings that are already existing? So there was this idea of, with the exception of temporary structures such as gazebos, for what it's worth, John mentioned just jettisoning the gazebo thing. So it would be detached and non-conforming buildings existing prior to whatever the date of adoption is, maybe altered to make interior alterations, and it's still up for debate whether or not you want to strike the word interior, or so that's just all alterations, whether structural or non-structural, in accordance with all the requirements of Article 16. Again, Article 16, we went through fairly thoroughly. It's the entire non-conforming section, non-conforming structures, non-conforming uses, and non-conforming lots. To create an accessory dwelling unit, provided the detached accessory unit dwelling unit can meet the following additional requirements. So we have another list. The first one there is the maximum square footage, and I would like to add, of the detached accessory dwelling unit may not exceed that of the main dwelling.
And even before that, can we add one? Because I think the whole issue with why the gazebo came up is the building footprint, that the building footprint is not increased. I mean, if you were talking about a non-conforming accessory building,
That is also, I think, one of John's.
yeah, and he had written something a little more detailed,
Yeah.
but which I
We
didn't.
can flip over to page 29. So you would like to, does that make sense to have that first, then the first
I think
statement
that
in
should
the
be number
list
one.
of
Yeah.
provided.
Because that's usually a given anyway with non-conforming structures. You can't
Mhm.
make them more non-conforming.
Right.
So, yeah. And so does it need to be in there, or is that in 16? Or is that,
I
if
would,
it's not in there anywhere else, we should put it in,
I would
right?
make it clear,
Make it
because that really was my only concern with adding those, the gazebo example
Yeah.
was somebody taking that and
And
trying to
make-
make it.
We have in the non-conforming, and I can find it again, but you cannot alter it or enlarge it, generally speaking. But John, on page 29, that first bullet point, consider adding the following: a non-conforming structure shall not be expanded or moved. So that moved part is not in Article 16. So the question, I guess, for you all would be, would you like to add this sentence: a non-conforming structure shall not be expanded or moved to occupy a different or greater area of land or building then the structure occupied when it became non-conforming. Would you like to make that your first bullet point on the list that we're talking about?
But if you went to move it, you then have to meet our setbacks.
Mhm.
So I don't see why. So what benefit would you get? The non-conforming structure can be bigger or I don't,
I'm not following you. in the
why would you
sense-
move it? I don't understand what,
Somebody for any number of reasons may need to may new sewer lines coming in and they want to move the structure before they convert it into an accessory dwelling unit.
right, and doesn't that automatically put them into, now you have to, if you're moving it, you have to follow our new standards.
And I guess it's also moving it. Let's say you have 20 feet of building that's 5 feet into the setback and you want to just move that encroachment over to another area of encroachment for the same 20 feet for the 5 feet that's into the, so this would limit them to not being able to do that. But I think what you're saying is it doesn't matter because if you're moving it, then it's no longer a nonconformity
Yeah.
and therefore it has to meet the new
Right.
requirements
Right.
anyway.
Yeah.
Does this help at all just to have this in here so that somebody reading it knows
I
that
think
they
you need to
can't
make
move
it
it?
clear that the building footprint cannot be increased.
Is that not covered in shall not be expanded?
John,
Mhm.
Yes, that's what Leslie wants to put in. You just want to put in, well, how would you phrase what you want to put in for? Like, so John has his suggestion here. What would you put in there at the very start?
the building footprint is not increased. Or enlarged.
Shall
Yeah.
not be expanded.
Yeah.
That's what he said there.
Right, so
I
he's
would
got a
split that.
non-conforming use shall not be expanded or moved to occupy a different. And I don't think you even need or greater area of land or building than the use occupied when it became non-conforming.
Right, how would it use more land?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have a bigger footprint, that would,
Right,
that's why I don't think you need or greater.
Say the building footprint cannot be increased.
So a non-conforming use shall not. You could say a non-conforming use shall not be moved to occupy a different area of land. A
It
different
can if
area
you're
of land
gonna
or
meet our
building, nor shall the building footprint be expanded.
Arnie, how do you usually phrase that you can't make something more non-conforming? What's the usual
In our-
formula for that?
Current section, Article 16, extensions or enlargements, subsection, a non-conforming structure shall not be extended or enlarged. So we already have that. I understand that we
Yeah.
want to bring it forward so that
Yeah.
it's clear, so it doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
So is that
Use
enough?
that.
Yeah,
That
Or
sounds
do we
That's
still
right.
need to
Yeah.
deal with any
Yes.
sort of moving or not?
No,
moving?
I don't
That
know
sounds
what
great.
that is
Yeah.
now.
So what I just read, a non-conforming structure shall not be extended or enlarged. We can just cut that and paste that in as the
Yeah.
first item in that
Yeah,
bulleted
I-
list under,
Yeah, I think just to make that clear from the get-go in here, I mean, that's just the main,
But-
you can't make it more non-conforming.
But that does not, that doesn't cover the moving it. Does it need, do we need to say anything about that?
No,
the presumption is if you move it, it's got to be, you cannot, it's got to be conforming at that point.
Great.
So you're taking out everything with that exception, just going from accessory buildings existing prior to the date.
So we're back on,
Sorry, are you?
No.
back
you
on
mean-
page 26. Is that right, Leslie?
yeah,
Yes. Nine, I'm talking at the very beginning, 9. There's no reason to mention temporary structures, right?
You don't need to.
Yeah, I would take that out.
So that highlighted portion would go away, correct? So it would read detached non-conforming accessory buildings existing prior to the date of the ordinance. Is everybody okay with striking that section that says with the exception of temporary structures such as gazebos?
Yeah.
and what
So-
gazebos are not a temporary structure,
That's why I got confused.
right? So I don't know what temporary structure you can't,
Getting rid
No.
of the gazebos example seems fine to me. What was the rationale for saying with the exception of temper? Oh, was
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I
Well,
wasn't there for
was-
that one.
I think
think.
it
I
has
don't
something
know.
to do with somebody could realize this is going on, go place a gazebo in the rear yard
Oh.
to hold it as a placeholder and then convert the thing into an accessory dwelling unit and therefore gain
Right.
some encroachment into a setback.
Right.
I
I
see.
think an accessory building is by definition not a temporary building,
Yeah.
right? So,
And we're gonna finish this tonight, so they don't have time to build anything, right?
yeah, so let's go. Yeah, so let's get, we get rid of that yellow part.
Another fault.
So detached non-conforming accessory buildings existing prior to whatever date we put in may be altered to make alterations, whether structural, non-structural. Right? So I guess we can get to that in a second. So where do we put the thing about the non-conforming can't be made more non-conforming? Where does that go? Is that our new 9-1?
I believe it is.
Okay, and then each one will then get bumped down one, right? Okay. All right.
So wait, but you just made a change, maybe altered to make alterations.
Oh, that we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have one or the other there. We'll get to that. Yeah. Okay. So which way do you want to go? Do you want to talk about the alterations? You want to go 1 to 3, 4, 5, et cetera?
Well, let's go ahead and finish up with 9 itself.
Okay.
We know what we're striking in that first part of the sentence. And then may be altered to make interior alterations. Are you fine with striking the word interior?
Yes.
Right.
Okay,
So we're striking everything in yellow.
Yeah, yeah.
correct, in that
Mhm.
Yeah.
paragraph.
But
Yes, ma'am.
except that now it says maybe altered to make alterations.
Right.
So can we
Maybe-
actually, maybe
Maybe altered.
maybe alter, may,
Yeah, or maybe altered structurally or
or
non-structurally.
non-structurally.
Yeah.
To be altered.
Trying to pat an S in there, get to the word limit. Okay. Oh, we're just about there. I can feel it. Good. Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So we're just gonna be maybe altered and that ends it, correct?
Maybe
Yeah.
altered structurally or
non-structurally.
non-structurally.
Okay, structurally, non-structurally. Okay, there we go. So the first 9-1 will be what we've already read from the non-conforming cannot be enlarged or expanded.
Yep.
So then the number 1 here will become number 2. So the maximum square footage of the detached accessory dwelling unit may not exceed that of the main dwelling.
Do we have to have detached since number 9 actually says
True, but
detached non-conforming? Do we, I mean, it's
just
just,
going for consistency
I would
more
just-
than
Okay.
anything else.
Formula.
Any issue there? I can't remember why we had that highlighted, honestly.
Right. I think we agreed on that. Yeah.
Okay. Number 3, you will notice has a lot of similarities to number 5. I'll read number 3. Any entrance to an ADU located on an alley must be at least 5 feet from the property line adjacent to the alley. Number 5, exterior doors must be at least 5 feet from the property line adjacent to an alley. And then it picks up or side street and at least 10 feet from the property line in all other cases. Can we strike 3 and keep 5? Or does that cover it?
excuse me.
Yes. Seems. to.
Yes,
Which,
strike 3
and at least 10 feet from the property line, which property line? Front,
in
side?
all other cases. Oh, right.
I think it means all other.
Based on what we just went over, although that was
Yeah, and all property line.
property lines 10 and 15 and 20.
Where did 5 feet come from?
But if the structure is
I think
right
it's just
smack on the
allow
property line,
Space to get out of the house on it.
right?
you know, like-
Then the door facing front will be within 10 feet of the side property line.
Discussion about this was.
Yeah.
That whatever building, whatever.
Yeah.
Part of the building on the property line.
No, but what if the door is facing so it's on the side property line, but the door is facing the street? That is it the property line that the door is facing?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Right.
I got it.
What number are you?
5, 3 and 5.
See, what is the entrance at 5 feet? What do you mean by entrance?
The door to the accessory dwelling unit, the entrance door.
I thought the whole thing had to be,
Oh, that's
15
the,
feet.
I was just
That's a
confused there
good
too.
catch,
This,
because
yeah,
we-
this
I
is
mean,
for,
this is so
Well,
confusing.
For
this is
existing.
actually good because it's catching inconsistencies because we did this element by element. So
Mhm.
there
Yeah.
was a point where we were thinking if it could be a non-conforming structure that's on the property line, would we allow it? Then we had the discussion, well, we don't want a door because of nefarious activity that could happen in the alley.
this is
But this
for
is
prior,
This is-
prior
existing-
buildings, existing. that are
existing
already
buildings. So
there.
that's the distinction.
Because we
Right.
took it, we took away,
Okay.
we basically limited
Yeah.
setbacks.
Earlier, we were talking about making it, building something fresh.
All right, okay, got
And
it.
Sorry, it
and at
took me a
one
minute
point,
to
we
get
talked
there,
about
but we're in-
setbacks for existing, and then we
Yeah.
said no, but if your door, your exterior door, that's what we're
Alright.
limiting.
So in this case, if you had a building on the property line, if you're going to have an entrance door, you're going to have to insert that entrance door 5 feet into the building, which you can do,
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
or find another place for the door.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So does it make sense to at least get rid of 3
Yes.
Yes.
and then
Definitely.
massage 5 if needed, or leave 5 alone if we think we understand what it means?
5 looks good.
I think it's okay.
Everybody good with 5?
I'm good with 5.
Down to 10.
Did
You're
we
skipping
didn't
the
do 4
4.
though.
Oh, shoot, skip that. 4, fenestration, including bay window encroachments or mechanical HVAC units must be at least 5 feet from the property line in accordance with section 4.2 unless it is located on a wall facing an alley or side street. So this is the section where we wanted some separation for existing buildings that are there. Some of the elements, I should say, of those existing buildings, such as fenestration, which is doors, windows, so openings in a building. Doors and windows are fenestration, including bay window encroachments or mechanical HVAC units should be at least 5 feet from the property line. So you can't go with those things right up to your property line and bother your neighbors presumably with those things. And you'd have to likely have a design professional help you meet those requirements to make sure your accessory dwelling unit that is getting placed into an existing building can meet those requirements.
So is there any issue with, and is the only part of this that seems like it might be problematic is unless it is located on a wall facing an alley or side street. So you could potentially have an HVAC unit right on the property line, like right on the alley. But with a bay window, you would have to have like a huge bay window for that to be on the property line with your building is 5 feet. So I guess the only question is whether it's okay to have the HVAC unit on the property line. Seems like it should
On
be,
an alley.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If it's on an alley,
Alleys are normally service entrances.
You want to take the chance of having your air conditioner run down by the garbage truck, go for it.
Fair. All right, then
Carry on. Carry on.
Anything else there? Okay. Now number 10, there is no maximum height limit on a non-conforming accessory structure to be used as an detached accessory dwelling unit. However, no additional height may be added to such a structure. I would recommend adding one thing to the end of that. No additional height may be added to such a structure above 25 feet.
Hmm.
If you have a structure that's only 10 feet in height, I might have to eat my words. Let's think about it. If you have a structure that's only 10 feet in height or less, and you can put an accessory dwelling unit in it, but we allow other accessory dwelling units up to 25 feet or a story and a half. And this is a little bit different because those are new and those have some setbacks that we've just established. And these may be on the property line or closer to the property line. Do we want to allow them to go up to the height that we would allow for a new accessory dwelling unit detached?
I would say no. Because you're talking about something that is already non-conforming, so you're making a non-conforming use more non-conforming.
Correct.
That would be my take on that.
So we didn't put a limit on new new accessory, the height of new accessory dwellings, we didn't put any height.
25 feet or a story and a half.
Okay, but I guess we didn't say or taller than the primary structure.
No, because
Okay.
we had those discussions and where we landed was a flat 25 feet maximum, even if that's taller than the main structure. So it's 25 foot for a new accessory dwelling unit maximum height and no more than a story and a half.
No additional, it might be added up to. Oh, so getting to Shannon's point, so then you maybe making it not more non-conforming.
But it could, let's say you had an accessory dwelling unit, not to complicate this,
She's
but I
right.
apologize. It's it's on the property line. So it's really only the 5 feet that it should be from the property because it's an accessory structure, which can be up to 5 feet from the rear property line, and it's with up to the property line. So you can design the extra height on this accessory dwelling unit, not within the 5 feet, but 5 feet and back, particularly if you have a half story. So the accessory, and not a dwelling unit, but an accessory could have been designed that way without the dwelling unit. So does the dwelling unit addition keep us from wanting it to be 25 feet in height?
I think it gets back to what Shannon said. It's if if it's non-conforming, you can't change the height.
We're gonna have some, it doesn't matter. We're gonna have some odd buildings that weren't
Right.
expected to be dwelling units, and the designers just gonna have to figure it out. So
Yeah.
I'll withdraw the 25 feet and then just leave it as is. So is anything else in there that needs to be reviewed?
In 10, you mean?
And
10, sorry, I can't remember what number I just said, but 10.
no,
yes.
But you said, I don't know if you, to add a detached.
detached accessory, yeah.
Yeah, I was
Gonna
just
add
for
that all the way through.
consistency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's okay, then 13, except as otherwise provided in section 420:16-1.c. A non-conforming accessory building may be changed to the accessory dwelling use in compliance with the standards contained in this section. That was a catch from somebody because we said in section 16 about nonconformities that you can't change nonconforming to a dwelling unit or some other use because you're not supposed to change. But here we're saying if it's a accessory dwelling unit, we are specifically saying that it is a use that's allowed because we have all these rules and regulations that are going to go along with it. So it just clarifies what can happen in that nonconformity and clarifies what we have in Article 16.
That makes sense.
All right, on to administration. The legal accessory apartments and detached structures are required to seek approval for the detached accessory apartment through the conditional use permit, and the accessory apartment must meet all requirements thereof. Any issues?
And that means all the new, like as if it were a new construction.
Right.
And basically what someone would have to do if they have one cooking right now that they have,
The only way is to come in for a conditional use permit and meet all of the requirements that we.
the more
have.
stringent ones that if, or what they do is when they get wind of this, kick that person out.
Yeah.
And stop having it as that use and then say, I got a non-conforming ADU. Can I, not afford, yeah, and then let them move in. Not to throw that out there publicly to say that's what they would do.
Mhm, got
Sometimes I shouldn't think out loud. Sorry, go ahead.
it. We're okay with that one.
Yes, I think we're all okay with that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Number 2, legal non-conforming ADUs may continue to exist as is. I really don't think we're going to have too many of those. I don't remember why that's still highlighted. We're okay with that one. The third one, I think we should move. This is actually a note to reiterate the accessory cannot be constructed without the primary dwelling existing on the parcel. In another section of the code, which I would struggle to find right now, it says you can't have accessories without having the primary use on the property. So to bring that forward, this was sort of a note here, and I would recommend that we change it so that we strike the first couple of words there and say an accessory dwelling unit cannot be constructed without the primary dwelling unit existing on the parcel, and then move it to section C13, which is just the general standards for both attached and or the general standards for accessory dwelling units.
Yeah.
So then somebody would see that there and go, oh, I can't actually build the accessory before building the house.
Yeah.
What if
Otherwise, it's
there
the
is a,
house.
what if there is an accessory building, but no primary dwelling unit? Like it is what you just said.
It shouldn't be there, but
Mm.
if we had the case that we have an existing accessory building on the property, is the question then, can you come in for a conditional use permit for
Right.
it?
You'd vacate your property line.
Well, probably so, because if you could show that it was a legal non-conforming use, perhaps before we had the zoning ordinance coming in to play, then yes, it would be a legal non-conforming structure.
So I guess the question then is, since everything seems to have been about trying to make sure that there's somebody who lives, who owns the property, is living there. Don't you have to have, I
Right.
mean,
Or then it becomes the main dwelling of the property.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, true.
exactly.
Then it's main at that point, it's not accessory.
right.
And let's hope that, well, setbacks, if it's non-conforming, not just with respect to the accessory, it's an accessory and there's no main, but then if it's within a setback or not, but they can show that it is a legal non-conforming use and structure, then they would be able to put a dwelling unit in it in a residential zoning district,
Make it their primary dwelling.
make it primary.
Or rent it long-term.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're going to have any.
Yeah, that's a odd,
That's,
that's an odd example, yeah.
Right.
But
I just
okay.
wonder
to think
whether,
about it a little bit more, but I still don't think we're going to have that
No.
one occurring.
Okay.
So is it okay to move
Yeah.
that to
Yeah.
13?
Mhm.
So it's just one of the general standards.
but that's, again, that's still just for general standards for building one new.
Yeah,
Right.
Or is
Or
that
you
for
move it
all
to-
of them?
Yeah, true. You could move it to general, or since you're pointing out that it's only for the new, you could do it to the other section that deals with E.
So isn't general standards applying to all of them then? Sorry, I'm just,
I guess it depends on how you reconstruct it. But yes, I think for now, I think it's safest to put it in the section C as item number 13 for general standards for all of them.
okay, and so that would in fact account, I mean, that would cover a property where there's no primary structure. Yes,
I believe so.
okay.
I'd have to think about it, but I believe so. Your definitions, there's nothing highlighted. Oh,
Didn't we
one,
already go over these?
yeah.
but
right.
there's one that I would like to talk about again, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
Building accessory on page 27. I think the way we had it proposed to you last time, and a question did come up during that discussion, was a subordinate structure customarily incidental to and located upon the same lot occupied by the main structure. And then we had proposed in the last version to strike the next part. So no such accessory structure shall be used for housekeeping purposes. That's how the definition currently reads. And we thought, well, we don't need that because this is a different type of an accessory than the ADU. But I'm now actually, after the question came up during our last discussion, recommending that you leave that in and then add the underlying portion, which says, unless the accessory building is in compliance with a detached accessory dwelling unit use and design standards in section 11.1.1, which is all of what we're developing.
Now, is that supposed to be building accessory or accessory building definition?
The way we have it is building accessory. So sometimes we may have left out the comma there. Sometimes it's building comma accessory or accessory building.
Okay, because like
Used
in
to
this, it is the same thing as the accessory building we're talking about on this. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
It would be.
We
good
don't
to
have
put-
anything else. So yes.
I could put accessory building,
Yeah.
in the highlighted part up here, yeah.
And then even in the underlined section, you say the accessory building. So can we change that then? Is that?
Hmm.
So we can't change it.
Okay.
Can we put the comma in then?
I think we should change it though.
It's, I mean, it would make more sense.
I would not know that that's necessarily the same, but yeah, I like the sentence you've added. Yes.
It's just a way, because if you were doing indexing, that's kind of how you would index it, right? Under
Right.
building,
I think that's the
subsection,
issue.
accessory.
It's the same thing, so we can easily switch around building accessory to accessory building if that's the easiest.
I think it's easier.
If we don't have to change anything anywhere else, it was just a question of it being right here. Right? Wouldn't have to go anywhere else in any code, and
'Cause it's called accessory building. in the
Yeah.
rest of the code.
Yeah.
I think it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even just the two definitions above it are in that accessory fill in the blank.
As a zoning administrator, I would just determine that those are the same thing. Building accessory is the same thing as accessory building. It's just how it's been indexed and how we've been, how we treated it. But is everybody okay with
Yeah.
that second half?
That's good.
yeah.
Remind me what housekeeping purposes
Yeah, it sounds, yeah.
refers to, please?
Yeah.
Remind me what that,
Living there as that's your house, you're living in that house. That seems like an old fashioned sort of term of art, maybe, right? It's just that you're living there and that's your house.
Yeah, sleeping and
You're
eating.
keeping house.
okay,
Yeah.
Dwelling, you shouldn't be dwelling in it or residing in it, or so housekeeping purposes is
okay.
So would it make sense to change that from housekeeping purposes shall be used as a dwelling unit?
Where are you?
Just so that everybody's super clear. If they're reading this,
so that sentence would be perhaps something to the effect of no such accessory structure shall be used for dwelling purposes unless the accessory building.
is in compliance with the detached accessory dwelling unit use and design standards.
I think, I don't know. I think housekeeping's okay. Somebody might say, well, that's just sort of my man cave that has a kitchen and a bed and a, but I.
Yeah,
sleep
I
out
feel
there
like
a
that
lot,
just must be an old fashioned term. I feel like that's just an old fashioned term of art. And so it's a question whether we want to come up with another definition for what it is, right? I mean, I don't see as how it matters too much, right?
I would say the only thing that it matters in is that if we're using, if that's the only place we're using that one term, then it becomes a question where one of our
Right.
commissioners didn't understand what it
Is
meant.
it defined
and
anywhere
our
as
other people-
housekeeping? Does it define anywhere?
Next definition on that page, dwelling unit. And the second
Ah,
line, independent
Housekeeping
housekeeping
unit.
unit.
indeed.
But it's up to you if you would like to change that housekeeping in the building accessory or accessory building definition or not. I'm not sure that it's. If we want to
Yeah.
modernize it, sure.
I've got no problem keeping it. I don't know.
Okay. We'll keep that one as is. Now there's I don't think we have it, but half story. 'Cause I think Lee Merrill in particular. And this is now off the cuff, and I apologize that we don't have that in your packet. But when we had read previously, when I had read after a question what a story is and what specifically a half story is, I read it and then Lee winced. I remember story half or a space under a sloping roof which has the line of intersection of roof decking and wall face not more than 3 feet above the top floor level, and in which space not more than 2/3 of the floor area of the ceiling next above it. Now, I should have provided you with a copy, so I apologize. But one of that is like the knee wall. If you're familiar with, you have the first floor framed up. So you have whatever's below you as a story or a floor. And then you have the second story floor, and then you have knee walls that are only 3 feet before the intersection of the roofing material and the walls. And I think Lee said that's not a whole lot, and I agree. So I did look at other definitions, and the other definitions had 5 feet. So I'm just throwing it out there if you wanted to perhaps allow a little bit more flexibility in a knee wall, which is only 3 feet, and you can really not really get close to that wall or really use it for very much if it's only 3 feet in height.
Why don't we just say 25 feet, period?
Oh, and get rid of the 1.5.
Mhm. I would do that.
Simply.
Does everybody understand that? The
Mhm.
maximum height for an accessory new structure is 1.5 stories in height and no more than 25 feet in height. So instead of maybe mucking around with the half-story definition, maybe we just get rid of the 1.5 stories and say 2 stories maximum and 25 feet in height maximum.
That's a lot cleaner.
Provides people with a little bit more flexibility on how to design. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to accessory building, keep the housekeeping.
So we need to make sure when we do an ad, Kate, that we also advertise definition change.
Parking?
Parking.
Didn't we, I
Done
thought
with
we, I thought
everything
we came
else?
to a decision on that, didn't we?
We did, but we had to review something.
Okay.
There was a comment from the public to make sure that we addressed or looked at the conditional use permits that are allowed for short-term rentals. So in the short-term rentals, when we went through that update of the zoning ordinance in 2016, 2017, we also came up with new use and design standards for short-term rentals. And there was one in particular on East Preston Street, not yours, the one next door, where they had been operating and wanted to continue to operate, but they could not provide off-street parking. So one parking space is required for each sleeping room. So they would have to provide, in that case, a couple of extra off-street parking spaces. They were in a historic district, and they were, their front yard had a very nice stone wall with an iron fence on top and gate. So the only way for them to install off-street parking spaces would be to mar the streetscape in a historic district. So we came up with a conditional use that allowed them some flexibility. So someone that is in or applying for a short-term rental that could not provide the parking, they could ask for a conditional use permit if they met one of 3 criteria, where they could thereby reduce or eliminate their off-street parking requirements. Now, why are we doing this again? I should reflect. There was a question or a statement that we already have off-street parking or parking requirements that are off-street for short-term rentals. Short-term rentals could be an accessory dwelling unit. So we should make sure that we look at that to make sure that there's no inconsistency or something that causes us some problems. Not necessarily that they have to be completely corresponding, but just to make sure that we take a look at both. So I'll provide that for you here. So everything in red is the existing conditional use permit language. So someone with an off-street parking, off-street parking may, upon the recommendation of the planning commission and may part of a conditional use permit by city council, not be required or may be reduced in number for short-term rentals located in the R1, R2, RM, and RLC zoning districts, provided that A. And the first one talks about if there's off-street parking already provided in a remote parking lot within 500 feet. That worked for the property that we were trying to address because they were very close to downtown and there would be other remote parking lots. I presume that's not really going to happen for most of the most of the accessory dwelling units that we're talking about in residential areas. So for that reason, I would think that we would maybe not want to consider a separate conditional use permit or fold these conditions in with a current conditional use permit that they're going to have to ask for anyway for an accessory dwelling unit. So that first one I would think is not so applicable just because we're not going to have remote parking lots close to most of these residential areas that we're talking about for accessory dwelling units. The second one, I think you may want to consider, And the second one is that the short-term rental is located in a residential historic district where a streetscape would be marred by off-street parking. And there is support from adjacent property owners showing agreement to reduce or delete the requirement for off-street parking. So somebody could come in a residential historic district, ask for an accessory dwelling unit, conditional use permit, because they're all conditional use permits currently. And if they had a situation where they did not want to mar their streetscape in the residential district, they could ask for not only the accessory dwelling unit conditional use permit, but this one as well, that would give them some flexibility to not provide parking or to provide reduced off-street parking if, again, they were in the residential historic district and their streetscape would be marred by the off-street parking. So that's one I would think that you may want to consider. I'm going to move on to the third one. Public parking is provided within 500 feet of the principal use and can reasonably provide the required off-street parking. I would not recommend that one. These accessory dwellings are going to have a parking requirement probably more consistent as opposed to a short-term rental. And we don't really want our public parking spaces utilized by people that are in residences that are, as opposed to providing that parking for our commercial users downtown. So at most, you might want to consider some leeway in B for residential historic district where the off-street parking may be marred by the requirement for that parking.
But we did allow 11I. I feel like we've addressed all of that with the second part of 11I saying that if the zoning administrator, they can demonstrate adequate on-street parking, then you don't need it. So I don't think we need to change what we have.
Okay, so that would be a vote for disregarding everything that's in red and just leaving 11, 1, 2, and 3 as is.
I think that I would agree with that. I also think it's hard to, like, how many adjacent property owners is required by by B? And how do you, it's like, no, I'm just saying that it
it's
makes
hard
it
to
more
say.
complicated.
I think it's worthwhile to look at because
Oh.
we want to be somewhat consistent and not have conflicts. But if you're okay with just leaving the 11, 1, 2, and 3 as is, we'll just leave it as is.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have.
Come on, really? Any more details in there? Okay. So
Wait a
that,
minute.
yeah,
Does this mean that we're going to be done with this?
no, now we're just starting. So then it'll be all the details put up, then advertised for a public hearing.
I'll offer this. Do you want to see the final? So we do our little edits and bring it back to you for one final review, or are you okay with what you've seen? You've seen plenty and you're okay with us
think we're okay.
advertising.
I've
Yeah.
seen plenty.
Yeah, yeah, and right, because anything, yeah.
So where are we? We are. So it would be the first meeting in October would be the first meeting that we could advertise. Hold a public hearing, and we advertise one, but you can certainly defer it, hold it more often than more than once if you want to.
If you're right,
But we would be advertising for that
Yeah.
first meeting in
do
October.
that.
That's acceptable.
think so.
Wait, well, yeah, okay, yeah.
Good.
First meeting in October is,
The 12th.
yeah, I won't be here, but that there's no reason.
I
to wait.
won't be here either.
John will be back, so we should be okay.
You listen to the tape, yeah.
Great.
I'm just going to make sure that I am going to be here.
Arnie, I have a question on the parking. Will the safety of the amount of, I mean, many of our streets are already, should be one way, but they're not because you can't get around because there's so many cars parked on these streets. So will the fire marshal be involved in this at all, or the safety, like the police department or the fire department? I mean, we don't need any more cars parked on the street.
We did commit to having the fire marshal and the building official review this once we got through the first cut. So we need to do that. But as far as parking specifically, no, there's nothing. We're not creating any additional use of the streets other than what's already there now. So they would just be using existing spaces on street if we allow that flexibility in, what is it, number 1 there? So I don't know if I'm understanding the question completely, in the sense that if there is some allowance in 1, 2, and 3, depending on how many spaces you have and how many you need for the new accessory. But yes, we are saying that some of these accessory dwelling units, there will be vehicles from tenants that were going to be parked on the street. So there will be a few more cars on the street. But I don't know from a layout standpoint how that impacts necessarily the fire department or the police department or the building official.
I'm just concerned because it's, there's already, I mean, I've driven down many of these streets during the middle of the day, not on a weekend, not when schools are in session, and you can barely get through. There's already, and
But-
now we're talking about maybe adding more cars that are allowed to park on the street, and I'm just not happy with
I
that.
think some of that's just management in the sense that you still can't park where there's a yellow line. So the people that are going to be allowed to park for these accessory dwelling units on the street still have to abide by all the rules and regulations. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily making anything worse by allowing that.
I don't think
Just
we're,
more cars parked, taking up space,
I don't-
and more that you have to go around to try and
I don't think we're,
navigate down Houston, say.
but we're not changing the amount of parking that's available. You know, the number of, I mean, there may be more people looking for spots to park, but we're not changing the existing ability to park. So the
We're just crowding
inconvenience,
it more than it already is.
well, the
That's all.
inconveniences to the people who are looking for a parking spot, I think.
But that's part of what the zoning administrator will look at. Is there available parking? If there's not, then we won't use that as a parking
Mhm.
option.
So as an example, if somebody came in on your street and they needed this leeway in number 1 or 11-1, it probably would not happen just because you were at the edge of that commercial district and there's really no parking available there. But I can see many other more side streets where it probably would be allowed.
Okay.
You said that the fire marshal and
Building official.
and the building, so will they have reviewed this before the October 12th meeting?
Yeah.
Great.
Put it all together. You guys can have it in your packet at your next meeting. We'll also give it this week. So that's before the public.
That'd be great.
They won't have much to look at, just the address, the door, there are a few things in there that we had some concern about, but I don't think it's going to take them terribly long to match this up with their codes.
But I just think that that'll be good to be able to tell the public that
Yeah.
they've looked at.
I fully expect they'll be able to have that by then.
Great.
Maybe not in the packet, but at the worst, we'll be able to make a statement at the meeting.
Great, thanks.
So we have public comment. If anyone is interested in public comment on everything we've just been talking about. Seeing none. We will temporarily put this to rest, and I feel bad that you do all this work and then you might miss the big hearing, but that sometimes is the way this goes, but okay. So I wasn't here much at all this summer. Okay, so then we move on to other business, zoning and planning report, if applicable, nothing. Okay, good.
Is there a
Oh.
appeal?
Yeah. I didn't write anything, but yes, there's a Board of Zoning Appeals appeal scheduled for next Monday at City Hall at 6 p.m. And that is an instance where somebody applied for a short-term rental in a residential zoning district on Diamond Street. And with that, they have to prove that they are a primary resident and provide a number of documents. I made a determination that they are not a primary resident. and therefore could not be issued a short-term rental registration. And they are appealing my determination to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Does anything need to be said on B? Key annual PC milestones? I don't think, right? We talked last time about how we're gonna get to discussing what's next after this, so we're good there. Okay, and that would bring us to
Yeah.
City Council.
We met last Thursday and the really only item of business related to planning was that we had the public hearing on the first floor dwelling unit in the C1 zoning district, and that was approved unanimously. And that's all I have.
Okay. So unless you all want to hang around farther, longer, someone should make a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn 6:55.